From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Major General Christopher Callahan of the Rhode Island National Guard passed the baton last week. He has led the Guard since 2015, seeing the organization through 2 presidents, 2 governors, the COVID pandemic, and more. My colleague Kim Kalunian sat down with him earlier this week to take a look back and a look ahead.
Major General Chris Callahan, thanks so much for sitting with me.
Thanks for having me.
So we're approaching the end of your tenure here at the top of the Rhode Island National Guard. I want to go back to the beginning.
Right.
What called you to military service?
So that's a fantastic question, and I've got an incredibly underwhelming answer. Because as I have been sharing with the group on reflection, my career started from a 1-inch classified ad that said 100% free tuition, like 42 years ago, in an afternoon daily newspaper, the Waltham News Tribune, up in Waltham, Mass, where I was kind of sitting with my dad. And I was a good student, you know, not a great student, not going to Harvard for sure, but financially things were going to be a little bit of a challenge. And we saw this ad. And he's like, oh, you know, what do you think of this? And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's the National Guard. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, yeah, I'll call. And that's how it started. So he called, and like within a couple days, there's a recruiter at my house, and we're talking about military service as a way to kind of get to college and to do that for, you know, tuition free. And that's kind of how it started. We kind of walked into it. As I've tried to share with the kids, my kids, do more analysis than that. You know what I mean? Like do more analysis than Dad when he started. So yeah. So
take me back to 2014, 2015, when you were having conversations about stepping into this role. How did that come about, and what went through your mind when you were finally tapped to lead this? Yeah.
So interesting. Thank you. Thanks for asking. So what was occurring at the time was I was getting ready to retire, and I had 30 years of service at that point, plus or minus, and was going to retire as a colonel. My mandatory retirement date was coming up, and then an opportunity to compete for this job came up through Governor Raimondo's administration. And I had a discussion with my wife about it because we were trying to figure out, hey, what are our next steps? Are we, you know, going to kind of get into that second career mode, or maybe we're going to see what happens here? And ultimately, we decided, hey, you know, you should try to compete for that job because you need to learn how to interview and talk to real people. Like that was plus or minus exactly what she told me, and I'm like, okay, you know, that's what we'll do. And
she thought it would be good.
She thought it'd be good practice.
Nothing
Exactly,
else. Okay.
Exactly. And so that's what we did. So I knew I knew our system pretty well, and once I sort of worked through my self-doubt, like, you know, could I do it? You know, should I? You know, did a little bit of that, maybe some negative self-reflection, and then I was like, go ahead, buddy, give it a shot. And then once I got in the mix, I was like really getting jazzed up. I was like, no, I can do this. And I saw my competition, and then ultimately was very surprised to be offered the position, you know, which was great.
So you're sworn in at the, sort of the latter half of 2015, August of 2015. I was looking back at some of the articles, and they were referencing safety around military operations because there had just been a deadly shooting. Do you remember those early days and what it was like to step into this role? Yeah,
I do. You know, it was a very poignant moment. The first 2 weeks of my taking over the position, Rhode Island had lost Andrew McKenna, and Andrew McKenna was an active duty soldier, a special forces soldier who was killed in action, if not at almost the same day. It was within days of my taking over that particular role. And so we kind of went into this support role for the McKenna family, who were lovely through a very tragic incident. But then there's this whole, backstage logistics operation that needs to come with bringing a fallen hero home, and all of the protocol, and being, thoughtful as to how do you go through this process in a manner that's dignified and respectful and of the moment, right? So the first, week or 10 days were, absorbed with that and working with the administration, and we had assigned a casualty affairs officer for the family, and so I guess what I would share with you was it reinforced this concept that our business is very personal. It's very much oriented towards people, and as you sort of peel yourself back a little bit, and if you look around, if we had time, right, and we walked around the building or we went over to Quonset, you go, wow, look at all those airplanes and look at all those helicopters, and wow, you got cannons and computers and radios and trucks, and it's people. If you don't have people, right, that know how to use all those tools, you don't have anything. So I learned a really important lesson about, just being there, having the team focused for the moment, and doing it in a manner that was appropriate.
Obviously, a lot has happened in the past 9.5 years. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind as a particularly hard day or moment? I mean, besides the ones that you just referenced right off the bat.
In terms of moments, I would argue that like sort of the initial sort of response time frame, with COVID, those were challenging moments, and they were challenging, for us, for everyone. That's not lost on me, by the way. That how hard that was for just humans, right? Like it was just a really difficult time. And so, in trying to develop a response plan and to have the right partners in play, to take this kind of abstract concept of a pandemic, which very few people had any level of experience with, and then to try to write out some initial steps as to what you can do to support the community, that was pretty important work. And so we did not have a playbook for that. There wasn't a previous template, that you could reference and go, well, they did this 5 years ago. I mean, I guess we could have went back 100 years to see how they went, like with the plague and everything else, but that, we know that wasn't going to be helpful. So those particular moments were very challenging. And the other sort of contributing factor at that time frame was, I think people were, in some instances, fearful, right? So now you're asking, your organization, in my case, the National Guard, to go out and try to support the community, and there's so many unknowns, and there's some scariness to it. It's scary for our citizens. There's some, fear in the folks that do what I do, and it's all natural, but it was unknown, and so I would argue that was the initial, or the most poignant, tricky time so far.
When we come back, the National Guard under the Trump administration and what's next for General Callahan. You're watching Newsmakers.
Every 6 months.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Our conversation with now retired Major General Christopher Callahan of the Rhode Island National Guard continues. Here's my colleague, Kim Kalunian.
Let's talk about the future. We have a new president. A former president now back in the Oval Office. He's already signed some executive orders that may change who's able to serve in the military and other aspects of the military in the states. And also there's going to be new leadership here. What do you hope for the future, both in the short term and the long term, for the Rhode Island National Guard?
So I hope that we are continued, that there's a continuation of us being resourced federally with the money and the financing, the contracting, the technological developments, the upgrades. I am hopeful that those will stay on par with what they've been doing for the past several years. So, on the whole, we're like 97% federally funded. The organization is predominantly federally funded with a small amount of, but important, state money because it's part of the authorities and legal structure. But the federal resourcing is a cornerstone of how and why we're able to do our job. It's federal equipment, as an example, that we utilize in our state mission. And if we didn't have it here, then we wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm hopeful.
What is next for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're going to, our plan thus far is to take February off. And then in March, I will travel to visit some friends of mine in Ireland, in Athlone, Ireland. And they're hikers, and so we'll go hiking. I'm trying to be a bit more deliberate, I guess is the right word, in the pause. Like, take the time, which is a complete discomfort zone for me, and because when you do slow down and try to take the time, what are you going to do? You got to think about things.
Yeah, someone mentioned to me that you're the hardest working man in the building, so.
So that's a really nice thing to say, I guess. One of the things I realized, and this was just in putting my remarks together for Friday, we have an unbelievable opportunity to work and coach with people every day. I didn't sort of put it in my head in an articulate manner till here we are 42.9 years into my career. And because our team is built up of people that at whatever level they're at, they want to take leadership roles. So from our junior leaders to mid-level, everyone wants you to give them the ball and let them go. And so what that does is creates a lot of energy, and so I realize now, I'm going to miss that a lot because of, again, it's people. It's a people business. So yeah, it's really good.
What else would you like to share with our viewers, with your members, et cetera?
So thank you. I guess I would remind our community that the organization is built from community members, but it does take the people. So I just would encourage, our parents and guardians and young adults to kind of take a look and see if maybe they can find something that works for them.
Fabulous. Major
Thank you.
General,
No, thanks very much.
Thanks for your service.
Our thanks to General Callahan and Kim Kalunian. When we come back, a reporters roundtable breaking down the region's congressional delegation's response to the first few weeks of the Trump administration with a reporters roundtable. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.
We are standing in front of this building because get this weekend, an army of unelected, unvetted, unconfirmed, unknown children broke into this building to steal your money, steal your data, and steal our democracy.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. That was Congressman Seth Magaziner at a rally outside of the Treasury building to break down the delegation's response to the Trump administration's first few weeks. I'm joined by 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi and from the Providence Journal, Patrick Anderson. Welcome back to the program, both of you. So, Patrick, is that the game plan for Democrats here, particularly, zooming in on the Rhode Island congressional delegation, to focus less on Donald Trump and more on, quote, unelected Elon Musk?
It really seems that way, that I don't know whether it's the polling or just the vibes suggest that there is an animosity towards Elon Musk out there in the public and that he is the target. I mean, they've tried for Trump for 8 years.
Two impeachments at last check, yeah.
So maybe try something new. And Musk is, untested as a political entity. So I think they are focusing a lot on him. Sheldon Whitehouse has really gone after Musk on Twitter or X and actually gotten an exchange out of him. So he's definitely thinking that way. But yeah, it's really kind of go time for the Rhode Island delegation after a couple of years sort of quiet, almost anonymity with the Biden administration of not having a huge amount of focus on them. Now they're sort of slowly firing up that kind of resistance engine, and there's a lot more focus on them than there has been.
You know, Ted, you cover both the Rhode Island delegation and the Massachusetts delegation. Do you think this is them coalescing around a strategy, or are they just kind of falling into it?
I think there's a lot of falling into it right now, and I think in fairness to them, that's because, we know what Trump presidencies are like now. We've gone through this before. There are news cycles. I mean, he talked about taking over the Gaza Strip, and it was only a 24-hour news cycle, effectively. So much news happens so fast that there isn't a lot of time for that kind of slow, laborious planning that sometimes happens in Washington, where the White House telegraphs something and the senators say they might do this, and a week later there's another little advance. No, it all happens really fast. So I think
but
that's
this
part
is
of what's
different
going
than
on.
even Trump 1.0. I mean, I think he only did one executive order out of the gate the first time around.
But the rapid-fire news cycles remind me of Trump 1.0, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think Patrick was saying this to us earlier as we were prepping for the show, and I think it's a good point that, in some ways, too, I think they're all falling into their natural comfort zones. Jack Reed, the institutionalist, is just saying over and over, this is not how this works. You're not allowed to do this.
Well, why don't we hear from Jack Reed? You caught up with him on Monday, and the entire delegation is being asked different questions about the Trump administration and his actions. And here's Ted's quick interview with Jack Reed.
What do you make of it, especially someone who's been watching Washington a long time, the level of disruption we're seeing?
Well, it's not just disruption, it's lawlessness. The people in the Treasury were not authorized to be there. They didn't have appropriate security clearances to get that. Yet Musk or the president, I don't know sometimes who is the president and who is not, simply overrode the law and let these people go in.
Well, as Ted said, he's leaning into his comfort zone, the lawlessness. And to your point, he said, who's president here? Is it Trump or is it Elon Musk? I do wonder, though, to both of you briefly, is this part of the Trump administration's playbook to distract the delegation, to distract the media by flooding the zone with all of this stuff?
I think it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. I mean, it's worked on its terms, but it usually always works to some degree. I mean, whenever there's a new administration from a different party, those first couple weeks are the high point. They're able to set the agenda. The opposition is, by definition, leaderless. I mean, there is no Democratic national leader right now, or even anything approaching it. And they're able to pick their issues and set the stage of what's going to be discussed. And I think they're really capitalizing on this with this flood the zone strategy. But if they aren't able to pass anything in Congress, the question is, what is it going to amount to as months and then years go on? Will they be bogged down when events happen? The opposition becomes more organized. There is a Democratic leader. And then you have things that the Trump administration couldn't plan on take over the news cycle. That's when usually it becomes tougher for whoever is in power.
Well, I'd also just add that, there's kind of two tracks going on here. And what's not getting a lot of attention is the tension inside the two Republican majorities in Congress. I mean, part of why Trump is being able to engage in this kind of shock and awe initial thing is everything he's doing is executive. Other than the Lake and Riley Act, which was already moving, it's executive orders, things he can do on his own. You're coming up against, or try to, right, and then the courts have their say. You're coming up against the debt ceiling being reached in a couple of months. The government is not funded past March. The Republicans can pass it's called reconciliation, their kind of tax cut plan on their own without Democratic votes. But even there, they have to agree because of their now majorities. It's much messier for a president to deal with Congress than just to announce things at the White House. And so that's going to be a time where I think it could feel a bit different from how it feels right now.
All right, so let's kind of focus back in on Rhode Island. And Democratic governors across the country, it feels like, are losing their mind, mainly because of the concerns over federal funding and the freeze there. And let me ask both of you, because you live and breathe it, to me it does not seem like Governor McKee is pounding the table over this issue.
No, he's been quiet and almost, it seems, intentionally so.
What do we make of that?
I don't know whether that is because he fears that if he draws attention to Rhode Island, that the Trump administration will then see Rhode Island as a target, and that the strategy from McKee is to keep his head down, keep Rhode Island below profile, because it is a small state. It can kind of hide a little bit. And that maybe federal funding that has already been awarded to Rhode Island will continue, and things will be more like the status quo. And that if he becomes part of this sort of resistance persona with the delegation, and is more outspoken, like Governor Healy and some other governors, that will draw attention to Rhode Island and maybe get some pushback. Or it could just be this is McKee's style. It's really difficult to tell, but we have not gotten much response from the McKee administration to things that even are happening that are affecting state government from the federal level. It's been extremely quiet.
You think Attorney General Peter Nerona has been the most outspoken? I mean, first of all, he took legal action. A major case was actually filed in federal court in Providence, so his team is
And he's part of a ever-growing list of other cases that sometimes a different attorney general is leading on. Yes. Yeah, I think Nerona, I mean, he did a national interview just yesterday, the day before, and he compared the Democratic attorneys general to a law firm, national law firm that's here to fight back. And you think, you know, even the delegation, they can talk and they can express concern. Maybe there's occasionally things they can do in Congress, but they're in the minority. There's not a lot they can do. Nerona is one of the only people, along with his fellow attorneys general, who have power to actually directly contest Trump's new claims on power by taking him to court. And so I think that's part of why. And Nerona, we've seen how he doesn't mind flexing his muscle in Rhode Island. I don't think he minds flexing his muscle nationally either, to the extent that he can.
All right, let's quickly, we have a little time left. I want to play the Republican voice in this, or a Republican voice, in their response to this. Listen to House Speaker Mike Johnson.
I think there's a gross overreaction in the media to what is happening. The executive branch of government in our system has the right to evaluate how executive branch agencies are operating and to ensure that not only the intent of Congress in funding mechanisms, but also the stewardship of precious American taxpayer dollars is being handled well. That's what they're doing by putting a pause on some of these agencies and by evaluating them, by doing these internal audits. That is a long overdue, much welcome development.
You know, 30 seconds, Patrick. I think a lot of Americans maybe here in Rhode Island might feel the way Mike Johnson does, in that it's time someone took a weed whacker to bureaucracy.
They might. I think there's a big sentiment for that. The question is whether that can be done in sort of an orderly manner and respond to Congress, whether Congress can act on it and do something, and what will happen when the courts get involved.
Yeah,
all these right. You just have all these different branches of government coming together, and it creates this chaos with the way the Trump administration is.
Got to cut you off. Patrick Anderson from the Providence Journal, Ted Nesi, thanks so much for joining us. If you missed any of it, it's on WPRI.com. We'll see you next week.